Today comes from the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5 through 7, and we'll be reading Matthew 7, 7 through 11. Ask and keep on asking, and you will receive. Seek and keep on seeking, and you will find. Knock and keep on knocking, and the door will be open to you. For the one who keeps asking receives, and the one who keeps seeking finds, and the one who keeps on knocking enters. Is there anyone among you who would hand your daughter a stone when she asks for bread? Would one of you hand your son a snake when he asks for fish? If you, with all your faults, know how to give your children what is good, how much more will your God in heaven give good things to those who ask?
Well, thank you, sir. Well, the good news is that this is the 5th Sunday of Jim Rigby's study break, and he will be back next week. I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Jim Taylor was preaching, and he said, well, there seems to be a theme about all the sermons. We started out with James Tallarico, and he was talking about love. And then Erica talked so beautifully about love. And then Jim talked about love. And last week, Babs talked about love. So I guess I have no choice. Tomorrow is Halloween. And the next day is the Day of the Dead. And it's the time of the year that we focus on the unknown, on death, on those we love who have passed on. Is there anyone here who is certain about what happens after we die? Darn. I kind of feel like Jack. I was hoping somebody would say they did, and I'd say, oh, you can preach the sermon. Because today, that's what I'd like to talk about. What happens after we die, and the spoiler alert is that I'm not any more certain than you are. I suspect I know what Pastor Jim would say about this topic, because I've heard him say it. He said, somehow we return to the love that created us. But the more important thing is that in this life, we find a way to manifest that love. And so I checked it out by email with him, and he said, yeah, that's okay. And while I agree with him, it's not easy for me to just suspend thinking about what happens after we die. And maybe it isn't for you either. But before we start, I want to encourage each of you to name and claim what you believe about death and what happens or doesn't happen after death. This is not a sermon that is meant in any way to convince you of anything. Rather, it's a sermon that's meant for you to hear what my journey has been on thinking about this as I've progressed in my life. And maybe some of that will be helpful. The traditional framework has been to look at the Bible, and especially to look in the Christian framework at the Gospel of John. and what it says on that subject. And it says that Jesus died and that he actually came back. When I was a teenager, our Sunday school class visited what we called other religions. Turned out most of them were other Christian religions. We visited Catholic and Lutheran, and we've come a long way because we didn't visit Muslim and Hindu like we might now, but we did visit a Jewish synagogue. And I remember thinking, thank heavens that Christianity has somebody that really came back from the dead so we can know. And I believed that. And I just found that so comforting. And maybe you do now too. Many, many people do, and that is okay. Just be curious about what I'm experiencing or have experienced. For now, I can say that I don't literally believe that Mary actually saw Jesus at the tomb on Sunday morning, or that he appeared in the locked room and told doubting Thomas to stick his finger in his side, or that he met with his disciples on a lake, actually physically. As my understanding of the Christian Bible has progressed, I now believe these stories in the Gospel of John to be poetry, which express precious truths that we can hold on to and maybe not literally believe in. But this presented my teenage self with a crisis. For what if Jesus didn't actually, literally, physically rise from the dead? How do I know what will happen after we die? Where is the certainty? Is poetry enough? So I began to gravitate towards people's stories of near-death experiences. Now, maybe you've had a near-death experience, or maybe you know someone who's had a near-death experience. And they tended to be stories where people experienced light and love, and they seemed to be an overwhelming feeling of love, and I found them helpful. And in fact, I put increasing relevance on them as some type of supernatural message, a type of revelation. And then one day I read a book about a woman who described her near-death experience as being in a room with Jesus and the 12 other disciples as they judged her life, and I lost it. I apologize to the men in the room here and who are hearing my voice, but what the heck would I want to go to heaven for, to be judged by 12 men? I can do that here on earth. I was furious. And I called a friend and we walked and I raged for a couple hours. God bless her, she just listened. And now I realize that I wasn't raging at this woman's experience. I'm glad this woman had her experience. But I was raging because I was losing near-death experiences as being revelatory for me. And since then, it seemed to me that near-death experiences are tailored to each individual person. And their purpose is to provide what they need, not to inform the rest of us. It's kind of like a movie with Jodie Foster that came out a number of years ago called Contact. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but they found evidence of extraterrestrial beings, so they decided they were going to build some kind of machine so they could go contact them. Kind of sounds like Elon Musk, doesn't it? And they did, and she got in it, and it whirred and did all these things, and all of a sudden she was on a beach with a figure that looked like her father. And that figure said to her, "I'm taking the form of your father so that you won't be scared." Maybe near-death experiences take the forms that comfort us so that we won't be scared. However, I venture to guess that most of us sitting here have not had a near-death experience. So, if the Bible isn't always helpful, and near-death experiences aren't always helpful, where do we go to figure out what we believe about death? Week after week, Jim talks about trusting your own experience of God as love and looking within for revelation. Not looking to what he tells us or the Bible necessarily tells us or what someone else, some political figure says. Maybe that's how we can proceed. But I'm also going to double back to the Bible here. Because the Bible can point us in directions that are helpful if we're discriminating about how we read it. There's much in the book of John about life after death. But John was the last of the 4 Gospels written, maybe 30 years after the death of Jesus. My son is roughly 30. So imagine what it would be like if I had my son and didn't record anything, had only verbal stories about him for 30 years, and then sat down to write. Just imagine what that writing would be like. Taking this into consideration, a group of scholars called the Jesus Seminar tried to evaluate all of our Gospels and figure out how likely it was that Jesus actually said all the things that are said that he said in them. And in 1993, they published a copy of the Gospels, which they color-coded. So they had in red the words they were pretty sure Jesus said, and then there was pink, and then there was gray, and then black they didn't think Jesus said. And so when you look at this book, there isn't a lot of red in all 4 Gospels. In fact, the Gospel of John has about 5 words in it that are pink. So they didn't believe that he actually said much of that afterlife stuff that's in the Gospel of John, although it's tremendously comforting. You know, I go ahead and I prepare a place for you, and so I started looking to see what parts could I find comfort with, and I looked at the other Gospels, and frankly, I was fascinated because what I found was that the words that were in red that they believed Jesus said were all about unconditional love. That's what we preach here. Hey, maybe we're more biblical than we thought we were. And so I found our scripture reading, I actually found two stories, one in the book of Matthew and one in the book of Luke, that talk about unconditional love that were in red or pink in both of these gospels. Ask and keep asking, and you will receive. Seek and keep seeking, and you will find. Knock and keep knocking, and the door will be opened. For the one who keeps asking receives, and the one who keeps seeking finds, and the one who keeps knocking enters. Is there any among you who would hand your daughter a stone when they asked for bread, or your son a snake when he asked for a fish? If you, with all your faults, know how to give your children what is good, how much more will the Holy Parent give good things to those who ask? What I love about this passage is that it talks about something that we have experienced. It talks about parenting, something that we can relate to, we can go within and say, yes, we felt parental love in some way. One of the most powerful images of the Creator is that of the loving parent or a parental figure. Either we've been lucky enough to have had loving parents, or if not, a loving grandparent, or an aunt, or a neighbor, or a teacher. I pray that everyone here has had one person in their life who has loved them like a parent would. And also, we have either been loving parents or parental figures. Not all of us are parents. Maybe we have loved a niece or a nephew or a neighbor or a student or a friend of a close friend or a child of a close friend. But the love, the unconditional love that passage speaks about is that parental love that at our core we know is unconditional. What would a God exhibiting unconditional love create for time after this life on this planet? Would it be something based on torment and punishment? Would there be a time limit past which you're doomed if you haven't done something? Would it be exclusionary? What loving parent do we know who would do that to a child? Unconditional love is unconditional. So I believe whatever awaits us is loving and will be unconditional, and it ties not only this Bible story, but what we feel about unconditional love deep within us. I have one more near-death experience story to tell you. Many of you know that I worked as a hospice chaplain for many years. And one of the people I talked about told me that he was afraid to die. And I said, well, what are you afraid of? And he said, well, I had a near-death experience, and I was up and I was in all of these cold marble castles, and it was awful, and I don't want to go back to that. And I said, well, how did you view heaven before this experience? And he said, that's what I thought heaven was big marble castles. And I said, well, maybe the gift of this near-death experience is that now you can reframe what you believe about heaven. What would you like heaven to look like? And his face lit up. And he said, oh, I'd like it to be full of light and full of love and full of laughter. And I said, well, could you imagine heaven like that? And he said, I think so. I didn't have the pleasure of seeing him again. He died before our next scheduled visit. But I hope that his experience of passing over was full of love and full of light and full of laughter. And I hope that, because as a loving parent, that's what I would have given him. So I don't know what will happen after we die. But I do believe that somehow we go back to the love that we came from. And one of my personal truest experiences of love is that of being a parent and my love for my children. And I trust the love that we will fold into will be even so much more than that love that I feel for my family. And because we have experienced unconditional love, we don't need to be afraid of the afterlife. When we pass over, we'll be welcomed with love, just as our loved ones were. And this is my thoughts on this passage. And now we'll take a minute for you to reflect on your thoughts. And again, this is only my thoughts, and it's not meant to convince you of anything other than what you believe.